Pip Tally-Ho, Joolz Guides here, in which I wander around London and tell you fascinating facts about this city. Today, I was planning a compilation of churches in London. However, I hadn't really done my favourite church justice. So I've decided to come back here to St Bartholomew the Great in Smithfield Market, because it really is my favourite church in the whole of London. And, by chance, the oldest. It was actually built in 1123 by a fellow called Rahere. He was the court jester to King Henry I, who was the son of William the Conqueror. It really is an ancient Norman church, and you can still see some of the Norman architecture on it. That's why they often like to film things here, like Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and famously, I think this is where she punches him in the face in Four Weddings and a Funeral. But anyway, Rahere was on a pilgrimage to Rome when I think he had a vision of St Bartholomew, and he promised him that he would build a priory, and this is the main church of that priory. There are occasions when I leave my hat on in a church. I just wanted to assure everybody that it is usually with the full cooperation of the clergy, and it's only for filming purposes. In much the same way as, I don't know, Arnold Schwarzenegger or Tom Cruise might leave their hat on when they're filming inside a church, if it's for the film. But don't worry, I do generally take it off. Gentlemen are kindly asked to remove their hats. Thank you. Why aren't women asked to remove their hats? Or bishops, come to that. Oh, well, anyway. But this is the tomb of Rahere. There he is. He's the founder, this fella here. Yes.
Is that how you say it, Rahere?
I don't know. Rahere. Right here is Rahere. Here, Rahere, here. Here, Rahere, here. It's really sad because in the 19th century they were renovating his tomb, and they took him out, and apparently one of the people who lived nearby, they stole one of his sandals. And then when they sealed up the tomb again, they didn't put back his sandal. So now his ghost apparently haunts the church whilst he's searching with one sandal. Honestly, who takes a sandal? Quite remarkable.
Where's the weeping statue?
Weeping one's over here.
Who knew that there was an actual statue that weeps in London?
Well, it doesn't weep anymore, that's the problem. Because they installed this Victorian heating system underneath, and it dried up all his tears.
Oh, poor fellow. He's crying on the inside, though.
That's right. Maybe he's a karate man. They don't show their weaknesses. A karate man brews on the inside. Edward Cook, a philosopher. You can even see the marks down below where all the water used to gather. What can ye keep your eyes from tears and see the marble weep? Burst out for shame, or if ye find no vent for tears, yet stay and see the stones relent. There are many other churches which are pretty old, but this one really does give you the impression of medieval times. I don't actually like this, but it's actually by Damien Hirst, St Bartholomew. Flayed alive, holding his own skin. Apparently that's what happened to him.
Well, we have different conflicting stories, but I'm assuming that this was used as a temporary tomb. So they would have put the body in and then moved it out for proper burial later on.
It's really creepy, isn't it?
Yes.
Have you seen the ghost of Rahere with his one shoe?
Many people have. Apparently he appears on a certain day in the year, close to spring.
Oh, wow.
Really?
So, yes.
Shall I go first?
Yes.
Oh, I'm not. Oh my goodness.
Actually, I don't know if you'll fit.
Oh,
Should we play
this is
This is fantastic. I can't actually see you anymore, Jude.
all this stuff.
And there's actual real bones up here. Let's see if you can find the bones. They're in plain sight, but...
Really? Oh, there's a bone. There's a bone.
Which bone is it?
Well, that looks like a femur.
Correct.
But whose is it?
This other side. That side's used for storage. It's less interesting, this one, but they had nicer graffiti on that side. Somebody's actually etched in St Bart's, but a much older version of St Bart's. I think it's at 16 something. Just some drawings of the church. That's a blueprint there. So look, oh look, isn't that lovely?
I feel like I'm in Indiana Jones. Archaeology is the search for fact, not the search for truth. Mr. Carruthers' philosophy class is just down the hall, if that's what you want. Most of the research is done in the library, and X never ever marks the spot. Hello, what's this? we've actually signed a waiver in case we fall over and hurt ourselves up here. But even so, I don't think I'm quite small enough to get through that hole anyway. All these funny little nooks and crannies. Wait for me, don't leave me up here with the ghosts. I'm coming. It's hard for me, I'm too tall. That's amazing. And then just up here, you've got this house. Now, other tour guides will tell you that this old Tudor house is where Queen Mary used to watch Protestants being burned in Smithfield Market. But that is what is commonly known as bollocks, because this wasn't actually built until 1559, and Queen Mary died in 1558. So what is interesting about it, though, is after the fire of London, buildings were no longer allowed to be made out of wood, so they asked for all these things to be taken down. But what they did with this one is they covered it up in concrete, and so the whole side was covered in concrete until the First World War, when a Zeppelin went over, and it dropped a bomb, and it revealed this beautiful building, and they went, hey! Very rare examples of Tudor architecture in London. There's St Bartholomew up at the top there, patron saint of healing, getting better, stuff like that, I think. Sickness, that's right. I think all this shrapnel and stuff on the wall here is from the Second World War. Now, I'm leaving out so much stuff about this area. It's so rich in history, but this film is about churches. That's why I'm not doing. I mean, there's another church in there, which I haven't even mentioned. St Bartholomew the Less. And that's still a part of the original Priory, I think. But the rest of the hospital all got rebuilt.
It's like it's being rebuilt now.
Now, after the dissolution of the monasteries, when King Henry VIII came along, he closed down all the monasteries, and he closed down this one here, this priory. But then I think there was a bit of an uproar, and everyone said, hey, wait a minute, you know, they do so much good for the sick and the poor and the homeless, actually. They were doing a lot of work for them as well. And so he said, all right then, well, we'll have a hospital here, and decided he'd be the founder of that instead of right here. So I think that's why you've got King Henry VIII up there, which is the only outdoor statue of King Henry VIII in London. He wanted all the credit, you see, I suppose. That's actually where Sherlock Holmes jumps off the building with Moriarty in Sherlock. Don't know if you watched that show. I think that Watson is round the back of this building, and then he whizzes round in time for them to do whatever it was they did. I can't remember how he actually survived.
Well, I don't know what's going on there, but in the real Sherlock Holmes, I thought he went off the cliff in the water.
No, I'm talking about the Benedict Cumberbatch one.
Who watched Benedict come in this match?
No, you're talking about the Reichenbacher Falls in the real, in Switzerland, yeah.
Well, that's just rubbish, isn't it? That's why I've never bothered to watch them. It has to be real to the book.
Oh, by the way, before I forget, I must remind everybody, please, pretty please, with the cherry on top, subscribe to the YouTube channel by hitting the little button below. It doesn't cost anything, just makes me look good. And just down here is another interesting church. I'll cut to a younger Joolz to explain all that. Right, so just across from the Old Bailey is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre Without Newgate. I love the names of the churches around it. That actually means that it was outside the city walls. That over there is the Old Bailey Criminal Court, but it used to be Newgate Prison. Newgate would have referred to the gates to the old city. And because the Old Bailey's just over the road, St Sepulchre counts as one of the Cockney churches of London. When will you pay me, say the bells of Old Bailey? They're actually talking about St Sepulchre's bell. Back in the 18th century, you could be hanged for like 350 different offences. By 1861, it had only been reduced to mutiny, piracy, murder and treason. The cart carrying the condemned prisoners from Newgate Prison would stop here, and they'd be given a nosegay, which is a type of flower. And then it would continue all the way up to Tyburn. My favourite thing about it is this really creepy bell which is inside. There's a special bell that the executioner used to ring outside the prison cells, and he used to chant this really creepy rhyme.
This is the execution bell, and it was rung by the bellman at midnight prior to the execution of the person, and the priest would go through this passage to give the last rites to the condemned prisoner.
You can still see the archway of the passage here. He'd have gone through there and rang his bell saying this creepy rhyme. So the custom started by a guy called Robert Dove. He paid 50 quid back in 1605 so that this macabre ceremony would continue on forever.
All you that in the condemned hold do lie, prepare you, for tomorrow you will die. Watch all and pray, the hour is drawing near. that you before the Almighty must appear. Examine well yourselves, in time repent, that you may not to eternal flames be sent. And when St Sepulchre's bell tomorrow tolls, the Lord have mercy on your souls.
And if you wanted to follow the route that Condemned would take, you can head up to Tottenham Court Road. But just over here is St Giles Church. And that's very interesting because St Giles was the patron saint of lepers.
There's been a church here since 1101, and it was originally built as a leper colony on the road to Oxford, away from the old city of London, in a remote place. Apparently it's quite damp and swampy, especially at the outbreak of the plague in 1665. Some of the first burials were placed in pits in the churchyard.
You see that big building over there, that's called Centre Point, and that's at the beginning of Oxford Street. Now, it was called Oxford Street because it was the old road to Oxford, but when condemned men were being transferred from Newgate prison along all the way up Oxford Street to Tyburn Gallows to be hanged, they would stop here to have a last drink bought for them by the church.
The condemned on their way to Tyburn would be offered a drink in the Angel next door. This is the story, as a last sort of merciful offering.
So yeah, it's now called the Angel, but it used to be called the Resurrection Gate. They'd go for a drink, then they'd have to get back onto the wagon, and their feet wouldn't touch the ground again until they reached the gallows and were dead. If anyone said, "Hey, do you want another drink?" they'd say, "No, sorry, he's on the wagon." But they'd need quite heavily armed guards because quite often the prisoner's friends would stage rescue attempts and abduct the criminal and disappear off into the area around here known as the Rookeries, or Seven Dials as it's known today. The whole area around here has always been a bit squalid and full of thieves, beggars and prostitutes. Not unlike today, really. And it was full of all these narrow alleys which now smell, let's say, interesting. The police would never be able to find them. They were too scared to go in there, apparently. I just want to show you something down in Ely Place, which is down here. In the 14th century, this was part of Ely Palace, which was the London residence of the bishops of Ely, which is in Cambridgeshire. Yeah, so this is St Ethelreda's church. I believe it's one of only 2 buildings which still survive in London, which was built under King Edward I. That was built in 1290. Unbelievable. Until quite recently, you couldn't be arrested here by the City of London Police. So if you did a crime in the City of London, they couldn't touch you. They'd have to call the Cambridgeshire Police Force to come down into this area to come and arrest you. It's amazing, these really ancient churches, and there's never anyone around.
The church is the oldest Catholic church in London, yeah, St Ethelreda's.
It was famous for its strawberry fields, and he's actually mentioned in a Shakespeare play. In Richard III by William Shakespeare, Gloucester says to the Bishop of Ely, "My Lord Ely, when I was last in Holborn, I saw good strawberries in your garden there. I beseech thee, send for them." You can actually hire her to get married in here, but it's a bit creepy. I'm not sure I want to get married in a place so easy. If you walk around London, you'll see loads of old churches, but not all of them survived the fire of London. But over here, between the Gherkin and this sort of Blade Runner type building, is one that did. It's rather charmingly named St Andrew's Undershaft, because there used to be a big maypole here. The maypole, or the shaft, was actually taller than the steeple. But my favourite thing about the church is inside. Morning. You can't just show up and go inside. You actually need to make an appointment by calling this number. Up on the window behind me, you can see the names of all the first Protestant kings and queens of England. Now, William Shakespeare would actually recognise this church if he were to come back today, because his name appears in the rate assessment of 1597. He lived in this parish, so he probably visited this church. But my favourite thing about it is in this corner over here. It's his monument to John Stowe, and he was pretty much the godfather of London historians. This was set up by his widow after he died in 1605. And he crossed the whole of London trying to chart interesting details about the buildings and funny little anecdotes in his famous book, The Survey of London. He was actually the son of a tailor, and the monument is adorned with emblems to do with the Tailors' Guild. As you can see, it's all made of marble, this, but the quill pen, he doesn't have a pen. And every 3 years or so, around the 5th of April, the Lord Mayor of London replaces this quill in a grand ceremony. I think that's really rather wonderful. Do you reckon they'll build a monument like that to me? I'm kind of surveying London, aren't I?
They'll probably give you a biro.
That Blade Runner building's actually the Lloyd's building. It's the most modern listed building in London. What?
just listening to you.
What? It's a listed building now. It's the most modern one.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
All right. Just outside Borough Station is St George the Martyr's Church. It's funny that wherever you go in London, there's always somewhere connected with Charles Dickens. I think he was a bit like me, just like spending his whole time wandering around the whole of London. And this is a place where Little Dorrit got married in the book.
This is a wonderful, colourful window put in after the war. There's a small picture of Little Dorrit carrying her basket. Also, obviously, St George, St Michael and All Angels.
Would Charles Dickens have come here?
He describes the vestry over there in quite a lot of detail. The fire in the vestry and Little Dorrit having a sleep in front of the fire. I mean, he'd have been very familiar with it because the wall of our old churchyard was the wall of the debtors' prison.
Just across from the church is the churchyard of St George the Martyr, and the north wall, which is on the other side of the churchyard, is the only surviving part of Marshalsea Prison. That wall over there is the original wall of the prison in which Charles Dickens' dad was actually incarcerated. And that's where you got the idea, because in the book, Little Dorrit's father is also doing time there. If the churchyard's closed, you can come around to the other side of the same wall here. We don't really have them today, but if it was specifically for debtors, you'd probably be in there, wouldn't you?
Yes, I would be one of them.
Whilst Charles Dickens' dad was in debtors' prison, he worked in a shoe blacking factory, which was over near Embankment. And that's where he met a bloke by the name of Fagin, who was actually very nice to him. And how did he reward him? By naming one of his most famous villains after him. So you see the clocks at the top, the clock faces. One of them's perpetually dark. And that's the one that faces Bermondsey, because in Victorian times, the people from Bermondsey refused to pay their taxes. So they decided the clock face facing Bermondsey would be perpetually dark, so they couldn't benefit from it. I think actually it's just because it's broken, and they called a builder in and he charged 800 quid to say good morning. Actually in the Castle pub, which is just opposite Farringdon Station, and this has the dubious honour of being the only pub which has both a pawnbroker's licence and a publican's licence, something to do with King George IV. He used to do cockfights here. There's a thing here that says the royal pastime of cocking. He loaned his watch to the barman in exchange for some money or something, and then later on he decided to grant the barman status as a pawnbroker. But anyway, all this aside, if you enjoy my films, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and if you want to know more about me, you can head over to my website, joolzguys.com, where you can even become a Patreon, whatever that is, and leave a donation if you want via PayPal, or if you want a private guided tour of London with moi, then just get in touch on the contact form. Cheers! 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 Cocking? Fancy a spot of cocking, the royal pastime?